Evan. To start, NATO Allied Command Transformation leads the adaptation militarily of the alliance. I'm wondering how that adaptation has changed since Russia first launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022.
First of all, thank you much. Hello, everyone. Thank you much for having me. How does it change overall? Of course, it changed, but what you all have to understand is what Allied Command Transformation is doing. We look at mid and long term, and we do it through a strategic foresight analysis. So we look out into the world and see what are the main drivers and changes overall, and then we come back and do some adaptations with that. So of course, you could say then we check and balance on are we going into the right direction? Because as we know, getting new capabilities takes normally between 7 and 10 years. So you really have to think in advance how you do that. Of course, what we're seeing now with the war on Ukraine, when it comes to the domains of space, when it comes to the domain of cyber, when it comes to unmanned, those are all things. But not only this, at the same thing, we all know when we go back 2 years ago, everybody thought this is a quick war and it should most probably it will end pretty soon. Now we are more than 2 years into the war. This is something for lessons identified as well when it comes to sustainment and enablement for NATO in itself. So there are so many lessons you still identify and you learn from that, and you still balance it with what we are planning and how we go forward. And that's with our main job, what we are doing.
And there, we were talking before this panel, it sounds like there's this tension between the new tech and the old tech. We need to focus on these things like AI, like cyber, like drone warfare, what that means. But at the same time, what Ukraine needs right now is a lot of old tech. It's artillery shells, it's HIMARS rocket systems, which were of course developed in the early 1990s. So how do you think about this, the marriage of this new and old tech when we're looking at a war like the war in Ukraine? And is there any sort of inherent tension or debate going on within NATO on how to marry these two?
Of course it is. Just as to give you a broad figure, about 80% of what we have in inventory, you might call it legacy systems, this is what you have. And those date sometimes back to the 1960s. So really what the challenge is, how do you enable fielded systems that are already quite aging, but still worthwhile keeping along? And how do you, through AI, for instance, how do you enable all those systems really being top-notch and going forward when it comes to providing the situational awareness, exactly knowing where you are in space and time dimensions with all those things, and at the same time now looking into new technology? Because the challenge we are always having is, and this is what I always explain to people, you have to be very careful not preparing for the war of yesterday. Because if you just buy tanks, if you just buy more of the ones you have already, this will not do the job. So you have to look into that very, very sensitive, how you're going to do that. Just in broad terms, how do we plan for a conflict in the future? We do that in 5 domains. It's air, land, sea, which is pretty classic, but it's cyber and space. And still tends that cyber and space are not at the level it should be in order to be brought forward. Everybody feels pretty comfortable. And if you look nowadays, everybody tells you how much more tanks they're buying, how much more aircraft they're buying. Don't get me wrong, F-35, for instance, is newest, best technology you can get, but still it's the same of something. So, but how do you enable, how do you get more advantage out of it? And it comes to space and cyber, and this is what we have to look for.
So, I mean, answer your own question that you posed there. I mean, how are you thinking about space and cyber and what that means for the alliance? What type of systems does the alliance need to invest in long term to shore up support there?
I will explain it in a little bit of a different way. The way we approach that is, I always like to explain it in, you have to have dominance in 3 major steps. First of all, you need to have an information dominance. If you have information dominance, then you get into the decision dominance, and once you have that, then you have engagement dominance overall. So really the first question is, what do you need for new technology when you go into information dominance? And then it comes automatically, it comes into space and it comes into cyber. So with all the systems you have out there, how do you take that, how do you take advantage over whatever enemy or peer competitor might be out there? So especially when it comes to communications, when it comes to reconnaissance aspects, all those things. And it's not only that. Nowadays, if you look into space, it's not about new space infrastructure. It's the question is, how do you use what's already out there? So the dual use aspect to that. It's assured access to space and it's data security. This is what we are after. This is what you have to invest. And this is where we need to come to closer a lot more and cooperate much more. So those are the systems we're looking for.
Is NATO investing enough in that at the rate it should be at this point?
I have to make one point here that everybody understands. NATO is nations. We are 32 sovereign nations. NATO is setting the standards. NATO is setting the outline. Just for the audience, 95% of the capabilities NATO has is provided by nations. 5% is common funded. So this is over and above. There are certain things like C2 systems, surveillance systems of common interest, and which are at the same time very expensive. This is what you get. So what we are doing is basically we are planning, we are looking into the future. We are in very, very close contact with our nations when it comes to the defense planning process overall, how we target our nations and what capabilities are needed. And then it's a sovereign decision what they are getting, but they know exactly where we are looking from a targeting point of view, what capabilities are needed.
Well, then to rephrase my question a bit, are NATO nations investing enough, in your view, in these two realms?
The answer is twofold. We all know over the past 20 to 30 years, there was an underinvestment throughout. So that answer number one is right now, whatever you invest in, it's good invested money because we need more. This is what you've heard now with the new defense plans we have coming. With a new defense posture, especially when you look towards Europe, there is a lot more needed, and it doesn't matter if it's defensive nature, if it's offensive nature, if it's reconnaissance nature, if it's C2, wherever you want to go, do it, and you invest into the right things.
You know, you mentioned the new defense plans. I think that's one of the most important, if sort of wonkiest and most obscure takeaways from this summit we're seeing this week. It doesn't get a lot of press coverage. It does in Foreign Policy Magazine, but not elsewhere. Can you talk a bit about that to the audience and just underscore the importance of these new defense plans, what they are, why they matter to the alliance, why they matter for military adaptation?
From the past we were coming, it was NATO in total, we always had this 360-degree approach. We said we need to defend, but it was not very specific. It was overall, and if something would happen, then we would decide and then we would plan against it. This has changed, of course, also with but before already the war in Ukraine, because we saw the tensions rising. And you all know, and especially this audience know, it's not only Russia. It's if you go down from Iraq to Syria, if you go North Korea, wherever you go, all your conflict vectors and threat vectors are upwards. There is none going sideways or down. So this is what you need to prepare for, and this is what we're looking at when we look at the challenges overall. So we took this, and then we said, well, we need to defend now already in a much more dedicated way, if you will. So this is for Europe, there we have now 3 regional plans. There is a southern one, a central one, and a northern one. And then you have the capabilities you need within that, but the main difference nowadays is now you have dedicated forces already to a certain area, so the forces know each other, you know exactly how you sustain, how you cooperate, so there is a much more detailed plan now. This is the new quality, if you will. And from that new quality, of course, you know, if you look at the possible threat, of course, from a European perspective, if you look, it's definitely Russia. You know what they have, and with that, of course, there's an increase, and I said it before, when it comes to defensive setups, when it comes to offensive, be it deep precision strike, be it integrated air and missile defense, be it ballistic missile defense. So in all those areas, with the plans, new capabilities, more capabilities, plus enablement and sustainment. And don't get me wrong on that one, at the same time, and you might heard that, a new conflict, it will be big in scale and in mass and in hard power. This is what you need, and you need it sustained. And this is what those new plans are. This is what we plan against it. My command, we go with the capability of planning against it, and this is how we are right now negotiating with the nations what we get.
I mean, you talked about these decades of underinvestment that both sides of the Atlantic are now waking up to and renewing investment. Is that investment happening quick enough? Is Europe rearming quick enough to be able to continue supplying Ukraine in the long haul?
I would say as fast as we can, now realizing that, of course, the past 20 years, there have been things not being done the way they should have been done. You know, I mean, you're right on that. You know, now it's we are now 2024. There are 23 nations now above the 2%. That's quite a success story. If you just see in this year, it's European NATO nations plus Canada. The increase in defense spending in this year is 18% plus. There you see the money is there, but at the same time, and this is also why this summit is so important when it comes to cooperation with the defense industry. There are a lot of discussions ongoing and side talks as well with that, because we also call it, it's at the same time, if you will, it's a war on warehouses, if you will, and you also deter by warehouses because just in time, delivery just in time, production just in time will not do it. Because we see if you have a prolonged war, you need to have enough capacity and capability in order to do that. How do you do that? You have to have long-term contracts. So it's not only that the money is there, that we have the turnaround, which is everything is very, very good, but now the defense industry needs to come with it. And the last point, ladies and gentlemen, this is not something that just is of interest for the military. It's a whole of society approach to it. And this is also what Ukraine shows us. This is what the new two partners or allies shows us, Sweden and Finland, for instance. They have a total defense concept. If you see how you want to defend your country if you're by yourself, it's a whole of society approach. And as you all have heard that, the army might win the battle, the nation wins the war. And this is where we need to go back to.
I mean, Congressman McCall was up here on the stage a while back, and he was sounding alarm bells on how the American defense industrial base was under so much strain right now. Have to deal with the Indo-Pacific, have to deal with the war in Ukraine, obviously the war in the Middle East. How under strain is the defense industrial base across the alliance in your mind, and how does that factor into some of the planning that you're doing down at ACT?
Well, what it is at the end of the day is, everything was leaner. It was faster, and it was, you had wherever you could save. This is when we think, and that's a lesson identified and lesson learned, it's all about resilience. And you have to get back to that. And if you come back, if you have a contract, you have like 10 or 15, 20-year contracts with companies, and they have to have a clear signal, a demand signal that they can produce and that they will be there and that they get money. Because as we all know, if a single spare part is missing and they're not producing it anymore, you cannot operate your weapon system. So the whole market needs to turn. The thing is, the understanding is there, and coming back to your question from before, you don't change it overnight. And this is where we need to come back to, and hopefully, that's sometimes, people tend to forget, in 2 years' time, if maybe tensions are not that high anymore, I don't think that this is the case, but still, then people tend to forget, and then we are back into the old system. And this must not happen again.
So in short, it's not just the investment of the money, but it's how you spend it.
Absolutely.
We've just got a couple more minutes here. I wanted to offer you any final thoughts before we get off stage.
Yeah, well, what are our final thoughts? The thing is, we think a lot about it. What is the conflict of the future? And I just want to give you one thought with that. From where we are today, the way we think today, and the way we think crisis and conflict will happen, this will not be the case in the future. And I give you just one example. When I talk to army officers and I ask them, what's the main battle system you're having? Normally you get the answer, it's the main battle tank. I tell you, in 20 years' time, it's definitely not the main battle tank anymore. Because if you have a digitalization of the battlefield, if everything is detected, you cannot camouflage anymore, you cannot hide anymore. It's more the 300 to 400 mile system that will hit you, and you even don't know what's happening there. So we really need to adapt fast. We need to go into a new direction. This is something I always would like to offer, and think about space and cyber. This is the most important thing right now. Think about 5 domains, but more focus on space and cyber, and then incorporate the new technology with the existing technology in order to maintain the advantage we have.
General, thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Please now welcome